and welcome to another episode of the Rabbit Hole Show. On this episode, I shall be talking about a watch. Not just any watch, no, this watch is the future, or maybe the future of the 80s and 90s back then. But this one had something different. But before I talk about the actual watch, I wanted to talk about the history, a brief history of the watches. The first ever watch came out in 1977. It was called the Monte Carlo game, and it included jackpot, dice, and roulette. So back then, having a watch that could do games was very futuristic. People must have been like mind-boggled, in shock. They probably thought you were a witch and should be burned at the stake or drowned. But this watch was released by Unitrex. It wasn't complex, but it was a game. Then Casio got in on it back in the 80s, and they made a load of games. There was also a plane game, a flight game, which I had, I believe, back then. And that really got me into these types of watches. And I used to collect watches, but I never had one with a game on it, and that was my first game watch, and I loved it because I could play a little game on it. I also had another watch which could turn over the TV, and I've just seen how much they're selling now, so I don't know if I still have that watch, but they're worth nearly £200. It's insane. This watch in particular isn't cheap, and these watches are not cheap now. Back then, I'm guessing they weren't really cheap, but trying to get one these days is insane. Now, Sonic were the ones that sort of made these games for Nintendo, and there's quite a collection of them. They went all through to like the late 90s, so they thought, fuck it, let's just make as many as we can. And I shall be sharing the one I've got now, which is Zelda. I previously borrowed this game, or this watch, back in the early 90s. My cousin lent me this watch. I don't know why, but he lent it to me, and I brought it into school one day, and I believe it was maths, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to play this game. I thought I was being crafty, but then I realized the sound was still on it, and the teacher heard like a meerkat sort of head popped up like, what's that? And then saw that I was playing a game and decided, you're not going to have this until the end of the day. So let's talk about the watch and what it does. Well, first you have a little screen display of a dungeon printed in the background, sort of cheap art, and then sort of grids of where your characters can go. And then you have 4 buttons at the front, the direction buttons, and then you got the 2 buttons on the side. The top button is to collect items, and the bottom button is to fight enemies. So I recently played this, and I had no idea what I was doing until I realized I had to get the sword in the top left corner, and press the top side button, and then fight my enemies. When you sort of kill all the enemies, you can go on to the next screen. So like a door appears, and you go through to the next screen. I don't know how many levels there are, but I managed to get to stage 3. And yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it. You can have the sound on it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I've been wearing it since I got it. I've got a better watch as well that does a lot more, but I decided, I don't want that one. I want to be limited on what I could do with a watch, and that's the Zelda watch. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and hopefully I can do a lot more with the handhelds I've got. and do a little brief review of what I think about them. Until then, I will see you next time. Ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba.